In 1964, a phone call would change the trajectory of cinema history forever. On one end of the line sat Hollywood's most beloved icon, Audrey Hepburn, poised and elegant as always. On the other end, a desperate studio executive pleaded with her to accept what would become one of the most iconic roles in film history. But in a decision that stunned the industry, Audrey said no. Little did the world know this single refusal would reshape not just her legacy, but the very soul of American cinema. What was this mysterious role that could have changed everything? And why did the woman who seemed to have it all walk away from what many considered the opportunity of a lifetime? By 1964, Audrey Hepburn wasn't just a movie star. She was a cultural phenomenon. Fresh off her triumph in Charade, alongside Cary Grant, she had solidified her place as Hollywood's most bankable leading lady. The world adored her delicate beauty, her impeccable style, and that ineffable quality that made even the most cynical critics swoon. She was Grace Kelly's successor, Elizabeth Taylor's antithesis, and Marilyn Monroe's elegant counterpoint. But behind the perfectly applied mascara and designer gowns, Audrey harbored secrets that would shock her adoring public. The woman who appeared to glide through life with effortless poise was fighting battles that few could imagine. The trauma of her childhood during World War II, hiding in Dutch cellars, watching friends disappear, surviving on tulip bulbs during the hunger winter, had left invisible scars that informed every decision she made. Hollywood executives saw dollar signs when they looked at Audrey, but she saw something else entirely in the mirror each morning. The pressure to maintain her image as the world's sweetheart was crushing her spirit, yet she smiled through it all, never letting the cracks show. She was at the absolute pinnacle of her career, commanding unprecedented salaries and having her pick of any role in Hollywood, which makes what happened next all the more mysterious. Industry insiders whispered that she was becoming increasingly selective, turning down scripts that would have made other actresses weep with envy. But no one could have predicted that she was about to make a decision that would haunt Hollywood for decades to come. The stage was set for the most shocking refusal in cinema history, and Audrey Hepburn was about to prove that even goddesses have their breaking points. In a dimly lit office in Beverly Hills, legendary director George Cukor sat hunched over a typewriter, his eyes burning with creative fever. The year was 1963, and he had just finished reading what he would later call the most perfect script he had ever encountered. The pages before him contained a story so revolutionary, so emotionally raw, that he knew it would either become cinema's greatest triumph or its most spectacular failure. The role in question was that of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, a character that would demand everything from its leading lady. This wasn't just another pretty face in a pretty dress. This was a transformative role that required an actress to convincingly portray a Cockney flower girl's metamorphosis into a refined lady. The part demanded not just beauty, but extraordinary acting range, comedic timing, and above all, the ability to sing with the voice of an angel. Cukor had directed some of Hollywood's most legendary performances: Judy Garland in A Star is Born, Katharine Hepburn in The Philadelphia Story. He knew talent when he saw it, and he knew this role needed someone special. The budget for My Fair Lady was unprecedented, with studio executives betting everything on this lavish musical adaptation. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As Cukor reviewed potential leading ladies, one name kept surfacing in every conversation, every meeting, every late-night strategy session. Audrey Hepburn wasn't just the obvious choice. She was the only choice. Her ethereal beauty, her natural elegance, and her proven ability to carry a film made her the unanimous selection. Little did anyone know that convincing her to say yes would prove to be the most challenging negotiation in Hollywood history. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Warner Brothers fell silent as studio head Jack Warner placed the phone call. That would determine the fate of their most ambitious project. It was a crisp autumn morning in 1963, and the future of My Fair Lady hung in the balance. Across the room, nervous executives fidgeted with their ties, knowing that millions of dollars rode on the next few minutes. Warner's voice was steady, professional, but those who knew him could detect the underlying desperation. "Audrey, darling, we need to talk about Eliza," he began, his Hollywood charm working overtime. On the other end of the line, in her elegant Manhattan apartment, Audrey Hepburn sat in her favorite armchair, already knowing where this conversation was heading. Negotiations had been going on for weeks, with Warner Brothers offering increasingly astronomical sums. They had started at $750,000, already a record-breaking amount, but Audrey's representatives kept deflecting. It wasn't about the money, they insisted, though no one quite understood what it was about. The role seemed tailor-made for her, the project was guaranteed to be prestigious, and the director was one of Hollywood's most respected. But Audrey had been having sleepless nights, pacing her apartment floors, wrestling with demons that the public never saw. Each phone call from the studio felt like another chain being wrapped around her already burdened soul. She had built her career on being the perfect leading lady, but perfection was slowly killing her from the inside. The truth was, Audrey Hepburn was terrified, not of the role itself, but of what accepting it might cost her. And in Hollywood's golden age, showing fear was the one luxury a star could never afford. In the quiet hours before dawn, when Manhattan slept and only the distant sound of early morning traffic broke the silence, Audrey Hepburn would sit at her piano, her fingers trembling over the keys. She had been secretly practicing "Wouldn't It Be Loverly" for weeks, her voice barely above a whisper, terrified that even her housekeeper might overhear her attempts. The truth that would shock Hollywood to its core was this: Audrey couldn't sing, not the way this role demanded. Her voice, while sweet and distinctive in Moon River, was delicate, untrained for the powerhouse vocals that Eliza Doolittle required. She had spent her entire career carefully selecting roles that played to her strengths, but My Fair Lady would expose every musical limitation she possessed. Night after night, she would replay the Broadway recordings of Julie Andrews as Eliza, marveling at the vocal gymnastics required for "The Rain in Spain" and "I Could Have Danced All Night." Andrews had originated the role on Broadway, her crystalline voice soaring through the majestic theater, night after night, to thunderous applause. How could Audrey, with her thin, tremulous singing voice, possibly measure up to that standard? The pressure was suffocating her. Every industry publication speculated about her involvement in the project, assuming her participation was a foregone conclusion. Fashion magazines were already planning cover stories about her costumes. Fan mail poured in from around the world, with admirers expressing their excitement about seeing their beloved Audrey as Eliza. But late at night, staring at her reflection in her bedroom mirror, Audrey saw something the world didn't. A woman drowning in expectations she could never meet. Trapped by an image that had become her beautiful prison, 3,000 miles away, in a modest London flat, Julie Andrews was living her own nightmare. The young actress who had made Eliza Doolittle a Broadway sensation was watching helplessly, as Hollywood prepared to hand her most famous role to someone else. The irony was devastating. She had breathed life into the character for over 700 performances, yet she wasn't even being considered for the film adaptation. Industry insiders whispered the cruel reality: Andrews wasn't cinematic enough. Her face, while pleasant, lacked the ethereal beauty that movie cameras demanded. Her voice was undeniably superior, her acting interpretation definitive, but in Hollywood's star system, beauty trumped talent every time. The executives at Warner Brothers had made their decision before negotiations even began. They wanted a movie star, not a theater actress. But Julie Andrews cast a long shadow over Audrey's deliberations. Every night, as Audrey struggled with her vocal exercises, she knew that somewhere, Andrews was probably singing these same songs effortlessly, her voice carrying the emotional weight that Audrey feared she could never match. The comparison was inevitable, and Audrey knew it would haunt every review, every critique, every whispered conversation in Hollywood, restaurants. This wasn't just about professional insecurity. It was about artistic integrity. Audrey had built her reputation on honest, nuanced performances. She had never been a singer, and everyone knew it. Taking on My Fair Lady would require either accepting that her voice would be dubbed, a humiliating admission of inadequacy, or attempting to sing herself and likely failing spectacularly. Neither option sat well with a perfectionist who had spent her entire career avoiding such compromises. The ghost of Julie Andrews' perfect Eliza was haunting Audrey's dreams, and she was running out of time to make a decision that would define the rest of her career. The autumn evening was crisp as Audrey Hepburn's limousine pulled up to the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel. It was October 1963, and she had reluctantly agreed to one final meeting about My Fair Lady. Wearing a simple black dress and her signature sunglasses, she moved through the restaurant like a ghost, every eye following her progress to the corner booth where George Cukor waited nervously. Cukor had been preparing for this conversation for weeks. He knew Audrey better than most directors. They had worked together before, and he understood the perfectionist anxiety that drove her. But tonight, he could see something different in her demeanor. The usual grace was there, but underneath, it was a brittleness that concerned him. This wasn't just another contract negotiation. This was a woman at a crossroads. "George," she said softly, settling into the booth and removing her gloves with practiced elegance. "I need you to tell me the truth. Not the Hollywood truth, not the studio truth, the real truth." Her voice carried a weight that surprised him. This wasn't the compliant starlet he had worked with before. This was a woman who had clearly been wrestling with demons. What happened? Next in that dimly lit booth would remain one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets for decades. Cukor would later tell friends that it was the most honest conversation he had ever had with a star. Audrey laid bare her fears, her limitations, her desperate desire to maintain the artistic integrity that had defined her career. She spoke about the nightmares that plagued her sleep, the constant pressure to be perfect, and the growing sense that Hollywood was slowly consuming her soul. For the first time in years, the mask slipped completely, and George Cukor saw not Audrey Hepburn, the star, but Audrey Hepburn, the frightened human being. Behind the carefully curated public image, Audrey Hepburn was drowning. The woman who had become synonymous with grace and elegance was privately battling demons that would have surprised her millions of fans. Each morning, she would wait to find another stack of scripts on her doorstep, another offer for another perfect Audrey Hepburn role. The industry had typecast her so completely that she had become a prisoner of her own success. The pressure to maintain her flawless image was crushing. Every public appearance was scrutinized, every outfit dissected by fashion magazines, every word analyzed by gossip columnists. She couldn't gain weight, couldn't age, couldn't show weakness, couldn't be human. The world had fallen in love with an idealized version of Audrey Hepburn, and the real woman was suffocating beneath the weight of their expectations. My Fair Lady represented everything she feared about her career. It was another opportunity to be beautiful, another chance to wear stunning costumes, another role where her looks mattered more than her acting. But this time, there was an added element of terror: the singing. The role would expose her greatest weakness in front of the entire world. Every critic would compare her to Julie Andrews. Every review would mention her vocal limitations. Every headline would question whether she was truly worthy of the role. Late at night, in the privacy of her apartment, Audrey would sometimes allow herself to imagine what it would be like to walk away from it all, to disappear from the spotlight, to live quietly, to be judged not by her appearance or her star power, but by who she really was as a person. My Fair Lady had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with her gilded cage existence. The role wasn't just challenging. It was a trap that threatened to define her forever as Hollywood's beautiful but limited leading lady. The offers kept escalating. Warner Brothers was prepared to pay Audrey Hepburn more money than any actress had ever received for a single film. By late 1963, the figure had reached an unprecedented $1.1 million, enough to make her one of the highest-paid performers in Hollywood history. The studio executives were confident that no one could turn down such an astronomical sum, especially for what they considered a guaranteed success. But money had never been Audrey's primary motivation. She had grown up during the war, living through genuine poverty and hunger. She understood the value of financial security, but she also knew that no amount of money could heal a damaged soul. The higher the offers went, the more trapped she felt. Each increase felt like another link in the golden chains that bound her to a life she was no longer sure she wanted. Her business manager was incredulous. Her agent was furious. Even her closest friends couldn't understand why she was hesitating. From the outside, it seemed like madness to even consider turning down such an opportunity. But those who truly knew Audrey understood that she was fighting for something more valuable than money. Her artistic integrity and her mental health. The financial pressure extended beyond just her personal considerations. Turning down My Fair Lady would send shockwaves through an industry built on the assumption that every star had a price. It would establish a precedent that might encourage other performers to prioritize artistic satisfaction over commercial success. The studio executives weren't just buying Audrey's services. They were buying her compliance with a system that valued stars as commodities rather than artists. And for the first time in her career, Audrey Hepburn was considering whether that price was too high to pay. December 15, 1963. The date would be remembered as one of the most shocking moments in Hollywood history. On a cold Tuesday morning, Audrey Hepburn's agent delivered a phone call that sent tremors through every studio in Los Angeles. In her soft, measured voice, Audrey had made her decision. She would not be playing Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Jack Warner, who had built his career on reading people and predicting their moves, was speechless. The entire My Fair Lady production had been built around Audrey's expected participation. Costume designers had been sketching with her measurements in mind. Set designers had been creating spaces that would complement her ethereal presence. The marketing campaign had been conceptualized around her star power, but Audrey's decision was final, and those close to her recognized the relief in her voice. For months, she had been carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, trying to convince herself that she could somehow transform into the singer that Eliza Doolittle required. The moment she said no, a burden that had been crushing her spirit was finally lifted. The Hollywood press went into overdrive. Speculation ran wild about what could have caused the industry's most professional actress to walk away from such an opportunity. Some suggested contract disputes, others hinted at personal drama. But the truth was simpler and more profound. Audrey Hepburn had chosen her sanity over her career, her authenticity over her image, her humanity over Hollywood's demands. In an industry where stars were expected to say yes to everything, she had found the courage to say no when it mattered most. The aftermath of Audrey's refusal rippled through Hollywood like an earthquake. Suddenly, Warner Brothers faced the terrifying prospect of producing their most expensive film without their guaranteed star. Panic meetings were held. Alternative casting strategies were frantically developed. And for the first time in years, a major studio found itself at the mercy of an actor's artistic conscience. Julie Andrews, who had been resigned to watching someone else play her most famous role, suddenly found herself back in consideration. But the damage had been done. The studio's confidence in her commercial viability had been shattered by years of being passed over for the film adaptation. The irony was devastating. The actress who had created Eliza Doolittle was now considered a risk. While the star who had walked away was seen as irreplaceable, other actresses began circling the project like vultures. Elizabeth Taylor expressed interest, though her recent scandals made the studio nervous. Sophia Loren was briefly considered, despite the obvious accent challenges. Even Marilyn Monroe's name was whispered in backroom conversations, though everyone knew she was far too unstable for such a demanding role. But perhaps most significantly, Audrey's decision had created a precedent that would inspire other stars to prioritize artistic fulfillment over commercial success. Her refusal became a watershed moment that subtly shifted the balance of power between stars and studios. For the first time in Hollywood history, an actress had walked away from the role of a lifetime and somehow emerged stronger for it. Industry that had always operated on the assumption that every star could be bought was forced to confront the reality that some things truly were more valuable than money. When My Fair Lady finally went into production, it did so with a crucial piece missing. The role of Eliza Doolittle eventually went to Audrey Hepburn, but not the Audrey Hepburn who had walked away in 1963. Warner Brothers, desperate to maintain their investment, had spent months convincing her to reconsider, ultimately succeeding through a combination of increased financial incentives and creative compromises. But the Audrey who finally accepted the role in early 1964 was a different woman than the one who had initially refused it. The months of uncertainty had taken their toll, and those who worked with her on set noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She was still professional, still gracious, still beautiful, but there was a resignation in her performance that hadn't been there in her earlier films. The vocal challenges she had feared proved to be as difficult as anticipated. Much of her singing was ultimately dubbed by Marni Nixon, a talented vocalist who had already provided the singing voices for Deborah Kerr in The King and I and Natalie Wood in West Side Story. The decision to dub her voice was kept secret from the public, but it was a professional humiliation that Audrey carried privately. The film became a massive commercial success, earning over $72 million worldwide and winning 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Audrey's performance was praised for its charm and elegance, but critics noted a certain detachment in her portrayal that they couldn't quite explain. What they didn't know was that they were watching an actress who had compromised her artistic principles for commercial success, and the internal conflict was visible to those who knew how to look for it in the years that followed My Fair Lady. Audrey Hepburn would give hundreds of interviews about the film, always maintaining the gracious, professional facade that had made her a star. She spoke glowingly about working with Rex Harrison, praised George Cukor's direction, and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to play such an iconic role. But those closest to her knew that she harbored a deep, private regret about the entire experience. The truth was that Audrey never forgave herself for saying yes after initially saying no. The months of internal struggle, the compromise of her artistic principles, and the ultimate decision to accept the role despite her reservations had left a wound that never fully healed. She had proven to herself that she could be bought, that her integrity had a price, and that knowledge haunted her for the rest of her career. Friends noticed subtle changes in her approach to role selection after My Fair Lady. She became even more selective, turning down projects that might have been commercially successful but didn't align with her personal values. She began seeking out roles that allowed her to use her platform for social good, eventually leading to her humanitarian work with UNICEF in later years. The vocal dubbing issue particularly bothered her. Every time she watched the film, she was reminded that her voice wasn't considered good enough, that her performance required technological enhancement to be acceptable. It was a professional wound that she carried silently, never complaining publicly, but always aware that she had been found wanting in a crucial aspect of the role. The woman who had built her career on authenticity had been forced to accept that sometimes, in Hollywood, authenticity wasn't enough. What if Audrey Hepburn had stuck to her initial refusal? What if she had maintained her artistic integrity and walked away from My Fair Lady permanently? The ripple effects of such a decision would have reshaped Hollywood history in ways that are fascinating to contemplate. Julie Andrews might have finally gotten the film role that should have been hers by right. Her career trajectory would have been entirely different. Instead of waiting until Mary Poppins to make her film debut, she could have reprised her most famous stage role and established herself as a movie star on her own terms. The success of My Fair Lady with Andrews might have led to more opportunities for Broadway performers to transition to film. Audrey herself might have found a different path, one that prioritized artistic fulfillment over commercial success. She could have sought out smaller, more personal projects that showcased her acting abilities rather than her star power. This alternative career path might have led her to the humanitarian work that eventually defined her later years much sooner, potentially saving more lives and making an even greater impact on the world. The film industry itself might have evolved differently. Audrey's refusal could have accelerated the breakdown of the studio system, empowering actors to make decisions based on artistic merit rather than financial incentives. It might have led to more diverse casting, more opportunities for theater-trained performers, and a general shift toward valuing talent over marketability. But perhaps most importantly, Audrey Hepburn might have found the peace and authenticity that seemed to elude her throughout much of her career. The compromise of her principles for My Fair Lady was a turning point that changed not just her career, but her relationship with Hollywood itself. The real reason Audrey Hepburn initially refused My Fair Lady was more complex and personal than anyone in Hollywood understood. Beyond the vocal challenges and the pressure to live up to Julie Andrews' Broadway performance lay a deeper truth that she never shared publicly. She was suffering from what we would now recognize as severe anxiety and depression. The perfectionism that made her such a compelling screen presence was slowly destroying her mental health. Every role felt like a test she might fail, every performance like a judgment on her worthiness as both an actress and a human being. The prospect of tackling such a vocally demanding role while dealing with these internal struggles was terrifying. Beyond what the public could imagine, her childhood trauma, the years of near starvation during World War II, watching friends and neighbors disappear, living in constant fear, had left her with a deep-seated need for control and security. Taking on My Fair Lady represented a leap into uncertainty. That triggered all of her most profound anxieties. The role wasn't just professionally challenging. It was psychologically threatening to someone who had built her entire sense of self around being perfect and prepared. Additionally, her marriage to Mel Ferrer was struggling under the pressure of their respective careers. The idea of spending months on a demanding film production while her personal life was in turmoil was overwhelming. She needed stability and peace, not the chaos and pressure of Hollywood's most ambitious musical production. When she finally did accept the role, it was as much a surrender to external pressure as it was a career decision. The Audrey Hepburn who walked onto the My Fair Lady set was a woman who had compromised not just her artistic principles, but her mental health and personal well-being for the sake of her career. In the end, Audrey Hepburn's initial refusal of My Fair Lady, even though she eventually accepted the role, became one of the most important moments in her career. It marked the beginning of her transformation from a compliant star into an artist who understood her own worth and limitations. The months of struggle over the decision taught her valuable lessons about the importance of listening to her instincts and protecting her mental health. The experience changed how she approached her career for the remainder of her life. She became more selective, more demanding of scripts that matched her values, and more willing to walk away from projects that didn't serve her personal growth. This new approach led her to some of her most memorable later roles, including Wait Until Dark, where she played a blind woman with a vulnerability and strength that reflected her own journey of self-discovery. More importantly, the internal conflict over My Fair Lady planted the seeds for her eventual transition away from acting toward humanitarian work. The realization that money and fame couldn't heal her emotional wounds led her to seek meaning in service to others. Her work with UNICEF in her later years became the most fulfilling chapter of her life, bringing her the peace and purpose that Hollywood never could. The entertainment industry learned from her struggle as well. Audrey's visible discomfort with aspects of the My Fair Lady experience contributed to ongoing conversations about the treatment of performers, the importance of matching roles to actors' abilities, and the need to consider the human cost of commercial success. Her willingness to show vulnerability in an industry that demanded perfection helped pave the way for more honest conversations about mental health and artistic integrity. Today, when we watch My Fair Lady, we see not just a beautiful performance, but a complex human being who fought for her principles and ultimately found a way to honor both her commitments and her authentic self. The story of Audrey Hepburn and My Fair Lady is ultimately a story about the courage it takes to say no in a world that expects you to always say yes. In an industry built on compromise and commercial calculation, Audrey's initial refusal and her eventual acceptance on her own terms showed that even the most beloved stars are human beings with fears, limitations, and the need for artistic integrity. Her struggle with this role reflected the broader tension between commercial success and personal fulfillment that defines not just Hollywood, but all of our lives. We all face moments when we must choose between what others expect of us and what we know is right for ourselves. Audrey's story reminds us that the most important victories are often the private ones, the moments when we choose authenticity over approval, peace over profit, and our own well-being over others' expectations. The woman who gave us Holly Golightly and Princess Anne ultimately gave us something even more valuable, the example of someone who learned to honor her own truth, even when it was difficult, even when it disappointed others, even when it meant walking away from everything the world told her she should want. What do you think? Could you have made the choice Audrey faced? Have you ever had to choose between success and authenticity in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's Golden Age. The truth, as always, is more complex and more human than the legends we create.